monster, aka a killing machine, or it's a god or a divine source. Either way, they're all supernatural, and they all tell a story, and I'm going to share a few of those with you today. So, I'm going to start with one that nobody knows anything about. So I don't have a story to go with this figure, but he is the oldest known composite creature. He's from the Paleolithic period, the lion man or the Holstein saddle figure found in a cave in Germany. And we do know that lions are powerful creatures, and they always have been. Probably even more so during the Ice Age, right? They're dangerous and they need to be respected. We don't know if this is meant to be a man with a lion head or a man with a lion mask. We don't know why it has been created, what function it served. It's actually a little bit bigger than your average Paleolithic statue. In fact, most of the Paleolithic sculptures that were made were of female figures that emphasize fertility. So to even see a male figure at all is out of the norm. So we don't know about this piece. But it is fascinating, and it is really fun to think about the possibilities. But we will see the lion over and over again. But if we go forward a few years into ancient Mesopotamia, which is in modern-day Middle East, the land between the two rivers, in fact, we see some stories that first come into play. We have writing, we have the epic poem of Gilgamesh, and this inlay from a great lyre, a musical instrument, perhaps is showing one of those stories. So we have on the top, can you see this figure who may be Gilgamesh, the hero himself. We have some figures that are animals that are doing human things. They're getting ready for a banquet. And then down at the bottom we have this man with a scorpion body. And the scorpion men come from the Epic of Gilgamesh. They stand guard outside the gates for the sun god Shemesh, and at the mountain of Mashu. And this entrance is the land of darkness, or probably the afterlife. And they open the doors for Shemesh as he travels out each day, and close the doors after him when he returns to the underworld at the end of the day. They stood so tall that their heads touched the clouds, and they had the power to turn people into stone with just one glance. Probably a reference to some scorpion tails poisons that can paralyze. And their function as guardian is to kill people who are not supposed to be there. But they honor the gods. So when Gilgamesh came, the hero, they sensed that he was at least part god, part deity. So they let him through and they warned him of what is beyond. And according to the legend, they were created to win a war, a divine war, by the gods. So they are supernatural in their creation, and they are supernatural in their power, and then they also help some people. So they're not necessarily all bad. The human, we think, like I said, at the top could be Gilgamesh. And we don't know if this scorpion man is guarding this banquet that is happening or joining the banquet. Perhaps he made friends with Gilgamesh and is coming to party. We don't know. But also from Mesopotamia, we have one of my favorites, which I'll probably say that every other slide. They're all my favorites. But this is the Lamasu, and it can have the body of either a lion, as it is here, or a bull. Either way, they represent power and virility and might. And then they have the wings of an eagle and the head of a man. So each composite creature takes on the symbolism that comes with each of those animals that it's made up of. So the lion or the bull body, I mentioned power and strength, the eagle wings being power, freedom, speed, And the human head, especially being the head of a human, it represents intelligence. But beyond that, he's wearing the horns, a headdress of a god. So he is, again, divine in nature. And together they come together to be the ultimate killing machine. And they are a protector of royalty. So they're benevolent to those who control this composite creature, but a killing machine for everyone else. So altogether, the monsters of Mesopotamia really are all about adventure, but protection of what is theirs and or their domain. You can always recognize Mesopotamian figures by their very stylized, patterned beard and hair, which are just very pleasing, I think. Now, another part of the Fertile Crescent, where people first settled down in the ancient Near East, and then also in Egypt, in the Nile. So these civilizations are developing together. Generally, they trade together. They're certainly aware of each other and their cultural ideas. But the composite creatures of ancient Egypt are a little bit different. So here you can see kind of a pantheon of the gods of ancient Egypt. And this is a story in itself. This is from a scroll buried with Hunefer from his Book of the Dead. And I'm going to use the mouse pad just in case we're recording for the live stream. But Hunefer is here, and here, and here. So it's showing multiple different parts of the story all at the same time. On the top, he is here praying to the gods. And we can tell these are the gods because they hold the ankhs, which are symbols for everlasting life. And when he dies, Anubis, who is the jackal-headed god, and has some symbolism in its might. So the jackal is a creature of the night, and they would actually feed on corpses if allowed. So he is the god who will lead a soul through the journey of the afterlife to make sure he's worthy to go on into the realm of the afterlife. So here he takes Hunefer by the hand. Here Anubis is again, and here is Mayat, and she often has the arms of a bird, so wings, in her depictions. And here she is the judge of the soul. She is the personification of truth, justice, and cosmic order. So she weighs the heart of the deceased against an ostrich feather. And we can see here that Hunefer's heart is lighter than this feather, which is good for him, because if not, he'll meet Amut here, which I'm going to talk about in a little more detail in a moment. But then we also have Thoth, who is the ibis-headed god, and he is writing this down. He is taking notes. He is the scribe of the gods. And the ibis is symbolic of grace and intelligence, so it makes sense that Thoth will be an ibis. So since he has a heart lighter than a feather, he is here now with a falcon-headed god, Horus, who stands for quite a bit. So his right eye was the sun or the morning star, representing power and quintessence. And his left eye was the moon or the evening star, representing healing. And he symbolized divine kingship. He's the son of Osiris, who is over here, the king of the underworld. And now that he has passed this ultimate test, he is presenting him to his father. And then Osiris is the god of the underworld. He's not a composite creature, but he is the first zombie. So some more monster origins. And that, as that legend goes, his brother Set, who's the trickster god, cut him up into little pieces and spread him all over the earth. And his wife and sister they spent some time collecting all of his body parts, put him back together, and resurrected him. So he is the first zombie, and he is part of the earthly world and the afterlife, which makes sense for him to be straddling both worlds there. So let's take a closer look at Amun here. He is your ultimate composite creature monster. He has the hind legs of a hippopotamus, and hippos are known to be aggressive and occasionally murderous in the Nile, so that makes some sense. And then the front legs and torso of either a leopard, as he is here, or a lion, again with that lion, and then the head and jaws of a crocodile. So his role, he is a pet of the gods, if you will. He accompanies Anubis and Thoth around, and if that person, deceased person's heart is heavier than the ostrich feather, then Amun will eat his soul. It doesn't get much more fierce than that. But when it comes to ancient Egypt, the pantheon, these composite creatures, the way of life is really all about getting into the afterlife, getting into that world that only the best, the most pure at heart are able to get to. So they live their lives in worship towards these gods, and they're not necessarily meant to be an animal in that head, being an animal depiction. It's meant to show that they have these supernatural powers. They're not of the earth, they are more than the earth. And yes, there are the occasional monster that will eat your soul. So moving over to ancient Greece, centaurs are one of those that are found in a lot of contemporary stories, as they are very intelligent and they are really great archers, but in ancient Greek mythology they were also monsters. So the Centauromachy is the story of the Lapith men, the Greek men, who overcome the animalistic nature of the centaurs. So the Lapith men are preparing for a marriage feast and of Pirithous. And so they're neighborly. They invite their neighbors, the centaurs, to this wedding celebration. Well, centaurs get drunk and they sexually molest the women of Lapith. So the men step up and they go to battle with these centaurs. You can see that the centaurs are depicted older. They have much longer beards. They're uglier, and they fight dirty. This one here is biting the Lapith man, and then over here, this centaur has the Lapith man by the throat, where this man is punching him, kind of holding him off with his leg there, leg to the chest. So the men, you might notice, are idealized. They're shown nude to convey bravery, and they have no emotion on their face, where the centaurs are old, ugly, and angry, and drunk. They lose, by the way, that battle. They are really, the story is, there's a moral to the story, which is to overcome our animalistic urges. We need to control ourselves. And classical ancient Greece is all about rational order over chaos, and the centaurs represent that chaos that we need to overcome. Also from ancient Greece, you might know this is my area of expertise, so there's a couple extra monsters from ancient Greece. So we have the story of Medusa, the Gorgon, and Pegasus. So this story comes from a couple of different sources in the ancient world. According to Hesiod's Theogony, she was one of 3 Gorgon sisters, and they were born of primordial sea gods. And the other 2 were immortal, her 2 sisters, but she was immortal. And according to Ovid, she was so beautiful that Poseidon, one of the main deities in ancient Greek mythology raped her in Athena's temple. Athena was very offended by this. That's a sacred space. But she couldn't punish Poseidon. So she turns Medusa into the monster, a composite creature of a human with snakes for hair. And anytime she looks at someone, she would turn them to stone. So the best known myth really talks about Perseus and how he's tasked with taking the head of Medusa back to this king. And he does that by waiting until the Gorgons are asleep. He uses Athena's shield to reflect the image of the Medusa and then cuts off her head. It's so powerful, though, that even in death, the head could turn a man to stone. So he had to keep it in a special bag. And when he cuts off the head, as it turns out, the assaults by Poseidon produce children. And in ancient Greek mythology, children can just spring out of any body part. So when her head gets cut off, out comes Croesus, who is a giant, and Pegasus, who is her son. So Medusa is innocent. She is a monster, and she is divine because her parents were both ancient sea gods. Pegasus is another one of those pets of the divine, and one of the few composite creatures that is actually pretty benevolent. He is not a machine of death, as many of them are, and he flies away right away, and it's Bellerophon, another ancient Greek hero, who rides Pegasus. And eventually Zeus takes him over and puts him in his stables. And at the same time, he is a god, so he does still fit into one of those categories. He is the son of the goddess Medusa and the god Poseidon. And then speaking of Bellerophon, I figured I should use my title slide and tell you about the Chimera here. So the Chimera was a legendary fire-breathing monster of Greek myth, and he was terrorizing Lycia until Bellerophon comes with Pegasus and is able to slay it. And typically the Chimera is depicted as a hybrid. It can be different animals, but here we have the most common depiction, which is that a body and head of a lion, again, a powerful creature, with the goat coming out of its back, and its tail is a snake. So the goat can represent just aggression in general, but especially aggressive sexuality. And the snake can represent, well, often in the ancient world, represents healing and something of the earth. In this instance, it is also something that can be poisonous, speedy, and deadly, and quick to attack. So this is all danger and all a killing machine. And this one is actually created from the Etruscan culture over in modern day Italy. And you can see that not only is this a creature of death and killing, but we can see the ribs and the bones sticking through. This is a starving animal, which makes it, if we get into a little bit more of psychology, we know that animals that are starving or mistreated are even more likely to attack and are feeling more desperate. So it becomes even more of a fierce creature in that respect. But Bellerophon does eventually kill him. And then I want to real quick talk about sirens. So sirens we often think of today as the mermaids, or precursors to the mermaids, and that's a little bit from a misinterpretation, I think, of Homer's Odyssey, story of the Odyssey. So, and the siren actually even comes from Mesopotamia. A lot of the Greek composite creatures are taken from Mesopotamia and then changed a bit to fit their own culture and what makes sense for them. But up to 7,000 years ago, birds were often depicted carrying spirits to the underworld. And this is where the siren kind of comes in. And in a Turkish settlement from 6500 BCE, there's an Anatolian vulture goddess who sweeps away the dead with a broom-like wings and might be the precursor to the siren. So we have here an image from the Odyssey. The hero Odysseus is here. He's tied himself to the mast of his ship because he's heard about the sirens, and they have a song. And it's thought that perhaps the song was otherworldly, perhaps even the music from the underworld, and it pulls you towards danger. And so this could be a metaphor for pulling you to death, literally and figuratively. So it could represent the potential for suicide, but really when it's paired with the ship or the ocean, that can be very calm and deceptive at times. You might not know that you're running straight into danger, and so that's kind of where the siren comes in. So in the 5th century BCE, the playwright Euripides describes the sirens as at the beck and call of Persephone, who's one of the rulers of the underworld. And another writer identifies the sirens as rivals and dark echoes of the Muses, who are goddesses of creativity. So that would make sense that they're kind of the opposite of that. And they're symbolic of natural forces that can be hard to explain. And we see that a lot in ancient mythology, and even today. So, again, to sum up ancient Greece, we have all of them are stories of overcoming chaos, of putting order and reason onto things that don't make sense. And that happens all the way until they have a civil war, the Peloponnesian War, and vast amounts of plague. And they start to see horrors of things, and then they start to get emotional themselves as well. So I felt like this lecture would be remiss without including some information on the Hindu pantheon. And I mentioned that ancient Greece is my background, but I have some understanding of the Hindu religion as well. So I wanted to include Ganesha on the left. He is almost always depicted as an elephant-headed man, and he is, like I said, always depicted this way. So while the rest of the regular gods might be depicted as men, Ganesh will always have the lion or the elephant head. So this represents the soul, the Atman, and the physical, the Maya. And he's also the patron of writers, travelers, students, and commerce. He removes obstacles, blocking new projects, and he's fond of sweets, which gives him, is a slight detriment to his figure. So he is, again, a god, but one that is pretty entirely benevolent. On the other side, we have demons. So this image, this rock-cut image, is of Durga, who is a goddess here with her many arms, and the demon over here, Mahishasura. So Durga appeared when the gods were unable to subdue this demon, who was threatening the entire world. So individually, the gods were unable to defeat him. They summoned Durga, and they gave her all of their weapons. So she needs the multiple arms and hands in order to hold all of the weapons. The battle did still go on because Mahisha continued to change shape. And finally, when she cut off his head as the demon emerged from the buffalo. So I will say that Hindu demons are not the same as Christian demons. They can be, generally speaking, the gods are benevolent, the demons are malevolent, but some of them can change or grow, and sometimes they're a mix of both. And there's also a mix of what is good and what is bad. The destruction of the world can be really good when a new world can come out of it. So we'll revisit a couple of Hindu gods in a little bit. So from here on out, I'll switch gears a little bit. I want to talk about kind of how monsters or composite creatures can evolve over time. So just one slide on the dragon here. On the upper left, we have a Mesopotamian dragon, Muhushushu. The dragon is a symbol of the god Marduk, and he is made of a serpent or a snake body with the feet of an eagle here, or talons, and the front legs of, you guessed it, a lion. And he's a protector, similar to the Lamasu. And here he's on the Babylon's Ishtar Gate. And then in the center here we have an image from European medieval period, a bestiary. And he's changed a little bit. We do still have kind of the snake, and then we have the wings of either an eagle or a bat, and then feet of a lion. And then today, dragons are something that people are still very fascinated with. And here's a still from the season 4 of Game of Thrones. This is Drogon. And he's still a composite creature, though. The wings are enlarged from a bat and the body of a giant lizard. So what they symbolize can also evolve, but often they are protectors of something, of royalty, of a hoard of gold, or and in this one, it is again royalty that he's protecting. In the Middle Ages, the dragon is a symbol of the Christian devil, of Satan. So some were huge, some were small, only some breathed fire, and some were shaped like humans, others were long and slender. Many medieval artists represent the dragon could easily be mistaken for a real animal, such as a snake or a crocodile, but they're all representing something entirely malevolent, something bad, something that is out for your soul. And then I want to switch to mermaids. So in sailor folklore, mermaids represent both good fortune and disaster, and it's very symbolic for the sea in itself. It can be very calm, very welcoming. Port towns are usually pretty successful because that is where they can conduct trade with different cultures, and it becomes very important. But it's so unpredictable, and many lives can be lost at sea. And this, as far as we know, the first story of a mermaid is Atargatis. This is also Mesopotamian. And here she's just depicted as a woman, but her story goes that she was half woman, half fish, and fish and doves were sacred to her, and that she at one point fell into a lake and she was saved by a fish, or in another version she was changed into a fish and her daughter into a dove. So she was a goddess who could help people, save them, but also drown them, depending on her will or how she judged the person to be worthy or not. So often mermaids were portrayed as powerful, vengeful water spirits who bring storms, misfortune, and death to those who traveled across the oceans, rivers, and lakes. And coming back to the Hindu religion, Matsya is one of the first avatars of Vishnu. So the god Vishnu is believed to take in his first 4 incarnations in human animal form. Matsya he would often be portrayed with a human torso and head and the body of a fish. Here in one of the older depictions, he is all fish except he he has a mustache. So we can tell that he has human intelligence there. And then Kurma, who is the form of a turtle's body, Varaha, who has a boar's head, and Narasimha, who has a lion's head. And the earliest accounts of Matsya are found in the Shatapatha Brahmana, where Matsya isn't associated with any deity at that point, but he saves the world from a great flood. So Manu is the first man, and he catches this little fish. It eventually grows a giant in size. And when the flood comes, and also a great flood that destroys the earth is common in pretty much all ancient religions. But he saves himself by tying his boat to the fish's, a horn on the fish's head. And so Vishnu, in that format, saves the world. In ancient Greece, we have the Nyriads. So while the Sirens were malevolent, they took souls to the afterlife for sudden death on the ocean. The Nyriads are deities. They're neither good nor bad. They're daughters of the sea god Nereus and Doris, the goddess, daughter of Oceanus. And there's 50 to 100, somewhere in between 50 to 100 Nereids. And they were depicted as young girls inhabiting any water, fresh or salt water, and they were benign towards humanity. So they're really popular in Greek literature. One of the best known Nyriad is Amphitrite, who is a consort of Poseidon. And this image, this lunette, comes from the story of the Iliad. And this is the Nyriad Thetis, who is a mother of Achilles, the hero. And so in this image, they are carrying him newly forged armor, which is a nice thing to do. And right back to Hinduism, I'm looking here from a version of Thai's version of the Ramayana, which is another epic poem. One of the heroes is also a composite creature, Hanuman, who is a monkey man, and he is on an adventure, and Suvanamaka is the daughter of a demon, so she is a demon herself, and she's been tasked with foiling the plans of Hanuman. He is trying to build a bridge so that he can go on his adventure. And she at first is preventing him, but eventually they meet and they fall in love. And Suvanamaka overcomes her demon side and ends up helping him complete the causeway so that he can go on his adventure. And she is now seen as a herald of good luck, and her figure is depicted in charms, streamers, and icons throughout Cambodia, Thailand, and Laos. Going to Western Africa, we see Mimiwata, who is also a goddess. So most of the mermaid lore are actually goddesses who are fairly benevolent. But she also can be a nurturing mother, a sexy lady, a provider of riches, healer of physical and spiritual ills, and the embodiment of danger, desires, risks, and challenges. So she has the potential for terribly destructive acts, but perhaps if you're lucky and you pray to her, she might give you all of the fortunes that you need or good luck in your trade. She's often depicted in the way that we think of mermaids, with the head and torso of a woman and the body of a fish. But sometimes she's also seen as a snake charmer, and sometimes in combination with her mermaid form, and sometimes just as a human who is carrying snakes. She can exist in the form of this indigenous African water spirit, but she can also connect with the Hindu deities and Christian saints from time to time. And then we have, going a little bit further, we have Hans Christian Andersen's The Little Mermaid, which some of you may be old enough to have watched The Little Mermaid. The Disney version, which is quite different from Hans Christian Andersen's, at least in the ending. So he was a Danish author who published the story first in 1837 as a collection of fairy tales for children. And it's similar to the Disney version, except the prince never falls in love with her, and she sacrifices herself for her love of him and becomes self-aware bioluminescent sea foam. So there is a little bit of a Christian spin to it at the end as well, but she then represents still a world that humans cannot understand, those natural forces of the sea, all of the things that a mermaid always has, but with a slightly different spin on it. So her conflicting personalities, the mermaid in general, as both a beautiful and seductive maiden and a monstrous sea creature that drags sailors to their deaths, it's a fitting representation for the wild, violent, yet fascinating nature of the sea itself. And I always find it interesting that so many of those natural forces in the ancient world, and that continue on today, are usually represented by a female form. But let's move on to the Sphinx. This is the Great Sphinx of Giza, is potentially the oldest Sphinx that we know of. It is a very colossal figure at Giza, and it's thought to be from the reign of Khafre, King Khafre, the fourth king of the fourth dynasty. It's thought to be his portrait on the body of a lion. So one of our most simple composite creatures that we've looked at so far. And it's a protector, the same kind of idea as a Lamasu or many of the other composite creatures that we looked at. But it's also a symbol of the sun god Ra. And since the pyramids are basically, they're also symbols for the sun god Ra, the Ben, and or a stair to get to the heavens, it really makes sense that the Sphinx would be attached in that way. But he's also a killing machine because he's there to protect his king. Now, the Sphinx goes east as well to Mesopotamia, and it's about 1500 BCE that it first appears in Mesopotamia. It has the wig of an Egyptian pharaoh, but they add wings. So again, very similar to the Lamasu. And it appears frequently in ivory plaques. Now, ivory, by the way, is a luxury item, only going to be owned by royalty. So again, a protector, but a protector of the elite of society, or royalty of society. Also, this adds a little bit of androgyny. The wig, the Egyptian-style wig, adds a feminine face, while the body is male. And when the Sphinx finds its way over to ancient Egypt, it has become a completely female figure. So there is a story in ancient Greece for it to go with the Sphinx, and she would terrorize people by demanding the answer to a riddle that was taught to her by the muses. And the riddle is, what is that has one voice, yet becomes 4-footed and 2-footed and 3-footed? And I'm wondering if any of you have that answer, but beware, because the Sphinx will devour a man who has the wrong answer. So, the answer is actually man, who crawls on knees and hands as a child, who walks with 2 feet as an adult, and 3 with a walking stick, we'll go with, in old age. Staff is what the notes say. So eventually Oedipus comes along and is able to answer her riddle. She immediately kills herself, or he kills her, depending on which legend you're looking at. And this is the first tale of the Sphinx. Now, she becomes this all-knowing creature full of wisdom. And here, and then the Greeks would create these female sphinx and put them on as grave markers, so they can continue to serve that function of protector of the soul. Now, eventually, the Sphinx is continued to be represented as female throughout time. In the Renaissance, there's a big fascination with all things ancient Greek, and this continues on into the late 19th century. So we have these images of Madame de Pompadour from France. And these mythical creatures are first introduced to France from Italy as ornamental sculpture, and they are found in the garden. So they're still kind of protective creatures. And then this newfound fascination with all things ancient Greece and Egyptian, they become produced pretty regularly and are found all throughout France. So the French Renaissance sculptures are highly mannerist, and they often had elaborate coiffured hair, and they're either clothed or unclothed, but they have luxurious accoutrements and pearls. These became an important decorative piece in royal palaces and gardens throughout Europe. And Madame Pompadour was very involved with the king and enjoyed accompanying him while hunting, playing cards, touring properties, and amongst other activities. She's very active in politics, and the king allowed her considerable leeway in determining a range of issues, from military matters to foreign affairs. And they become really popular. And after her death, Madame du Barry is also depicted as a garden sphinx. Now, we come to our piece. This is Virginia Lee Montgomery's Sword and the Sphinx, and we have it up at the entryway until the end of this month. And she is calling into question some common themes that have kind of followed the Sphinx throughout the years. She cast an original garden sphinx from cement into, and then she created a mold and then cast it in epoxy resin. So she's using one of the first items to be mass reproduced right before we get to the Industrial Revolution, where everything's being mass reproduced, but with machines. But molds could be made for quite some time since the ancient world. You need a mold for casting bronze. So to see so many of these sphinxes in just before the Victorian era, or right around the Victorian era, we see mass production. And then it calls into question of what is important. It calls into question importance. And Madame Pompadour she's been portrayed as a wily schemer who uses sex to gain an appropriate influence over the king and grab power for herself. She was heavily criticized for France's failure in the 7 Years' War and for running court debts. So there is an additional addressing of the duality of the role of women in society, and she is the official royal mistress, not wife or queen. And here, she has literally been stabbed in the back with a steel sword. And Virginia Lee Montgomery has a friend who casts swords, and this is a, not Inquisition, what is the time period from? The Crusade. This is a Crusade sword. Thank you. But She's stabbed in a way that, while it would be very painful, it does not kill her. And her face is one that is pretty stoic, or even has a little smirk, one of a defiant, I care not what you do to me kind of a face. We also have a film playing in the theater upstairs. This one is called Copy Sphinx. And the viewer sees holes being drilled out of the eye area of the Sphinx, and of multiples. As you can see, here's all of some faces that have been drilled out. And then another image where she puts her arm through a hole in the back of the Sphinx. So she is bringing up questions of the value of mass reproduction, of a cut and copy society, the value that society places on objects, on the supernatural, and on women in this contemporary exploration of an ancient monster. And I am going to end here with this image from Francisco Goya, "The Sleep of Reason Produces Monsters." And you can see that these creatures of the night are coming out of this man when he sleeps. We have the owl, the bat up here, a lynx down here, and right in the center of the composition, a composite creature of unknown origin staring right out at us. And as he said, fantasy abandoned by reason produces impossible monsters. United with it, she is the mother of the arts and the origin of marvels. So I dare say that monsters are much needed in our society, whether they be known to us or unknown. And with that, I am available to answer any questions that you have. Thank you. Thank you. Question?
So, out of all the research you've done for this presentation, which one was your favorite monster?
Good question. I will say that when I first got into art history and ancient mythology, the monsters of ancient Greece were my favorites. But I have to say, in representing the idea of the monster, I think the ancient Egyptians' Amut is the scariest, and therefore my favorite monster of this lecture. He will eat your soul. So, yeah. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you so much for coming. And our next exhibition will be April 1st. It'll be Art of Yinka Shonobari. It's going to be an amazing show, so hope to see you there. And there is another lecture by world famous artist Jaume Plenza on November 30th. And I think if you're a member, you can register on our website for that, so check it out. Thank you.